For 10 years, I raised 3 children in place of my own daughter, rushing them to the hospital at midnight for asthma attacks, carrying an EpiPen on every car ride because of severe allergies, taking extra carpentry jobs, one wooden table at a time, to pay for school and medication, until one seemingly ordinary morning, when the police broke down my door, handcuffed me in front of the kids, and my daughter stood on the porch, telling the neighbors that I was a kidnapper, and I became the villain in my own home. If you have ever been publicly shamed, ever been turned into the bad guy simply because you stood between greed and what was right, leave a dot and tell me where you are listening to this story from. And if you want to keep walking alongside quiet stories of justice like this, I would deeply appreciate your subscription. Silver Creek, Oregon, is a small town accustomed to rain. The rain is not loud or violent, it just falls steadily and lingers long enough that people learn to adjust their rhythm of life. Afternoons arrive quickly here. Porch lights turn on early. The houses are low and close together, making it easy for whatever happens inside one home to reach the ears of the neighbors. The community is close-knit, but because of that, there is little room to hide from other people's eyes. My house sits at the end of a short slope. It is an old wooden place, the paint faded, the porch roof marked by a few small cracks. There is nothing remarkable about it from the outside. The only thing that ever catches a stranger's attention is the mailbox set close to the fence. It bears only one name, C. Moore. I am Calvin Moore, 69 years old. I used to be a carpenter and furniture restorer. A small workshop, steady work, but nothing big. I made enough to live, enough to raise a family, never more than that. I am retired now, but my hands still instinctively fix anything loose around the house. My right wrist goes numb when the weather turns cold. My left knee aches whenever I stand too long. I know my body has passed through many years of labor and is no longer what it once was. 14 years ago, my daughter left Silver Creek, Daphne Moore. There was no great argument, no clear promise. She said she needed time, and then she was gone. From that day on, she never returned. I do not know exactly why. I no longer search for the answer. The only thing I know is that she left behind 3 children, and I stayed with them. From that moment, my life was organized around things that could not be done wrong. Mila's medication schedule is taped to the refrigerator, every hour clearly written out. She is 15 years old, asthmatic, and prone to attacks when the air is damp. Jonah's EpiPen is always kept in the bottom drawer, and I check the expiration date regularly. Jonah is 13 years old, with severe food allergies. The smallest mistake could be dangerous. Evan, 18 years old, is the oldest. He stands nearly half, a head taller than me, yet he still keeps the habit of watching everything in the house, as if afraid that one day it might all collapse if he lets his guard down. The dining table is something I built myself from reclaimed oak. The surface is smooth, the edges rounded to prevent injury. In the left corner there is a small scratch, made by Jonah when he was little. I did not fix it. That table was where we ate dinner, did homework, took medicine, argued, and sat in silence. Everything in our daily life revolved around it. Every morning I went out to collect the mail. Bills, school paperwork, and medical notices. All of it was addressed either to the 3 kids. On the mailbox there was only one name, C. Moore. I put that name there the day Daphne left. Not to deny that she was my daughter, but because of a simple reality. The person carrying responsibility here was me. Daphne no longer lived in this house, no longer received mail, no longer signed documents, or took the children to doctor's appointments. Jonah was the first to ask. One time he stood beside me at the gate, looking at the mailbox, and asked, "Why isn't Mom's name there?" I answered simply, "Because Mom doesn't live here." Jonah stayed quiet for a moment, then asked, "What if Mom comes back?" I did not answer right away. I said, "If Mom comes back, you kids will decide who gets to stand in front of this gate." Jonah nodded. He did not fully understand, but he remembered that answer. Inside the house, Mila often sat near the window when it rained, holding a mug of hot cocoa to help her breathe more easily. Evan held his college acceptance letter, read it, then set it down on the table. He looked at me without saying anything. I handed him the household plan, the doctor's phone numbers, Mila's follow-up schedule, the list of foods Jonah must never touch, and said briefly, "I'll be fine. You go." Evan turned away, trying to keep himself together. The afternoon passed slowly. The rain kept falling. I rested my hand on the wooden tabletop, feeling the familiarity of the house. In Silver Creek, there are not many secrets. A name missing from a mailbox is not a big deal, but it clearly shows who stayed, who left, and who is carrying the heaviest share of responsibility. I knew that absence was not finished. It was only waiting for another moment to return, and when it did, nothing would be as simple as it was now. 6 o'clock in the morning in Silver Creek is usually very quiet. Light rain falls, the kettle starts to make noise in the kitchen, and houses keep their curtains closed. That morning, everything ended before it could even begin. I was standing in the kitchen, pouring hot water into a thermos for Mila to take to school, when I heard the sound of tires braking hard outside. Not one vehicle, several. Heavy engines, doors slamming shut in rapid succession. The instinct of someone who has lived a long time with responsibility made me set the thermos down immediately. Before I could step out of the kitchen, a pounding hit the door. Not knocking, but direct impact. Metal against wood, again and again, sharp and final. "Police! Open the door!" The voice was dry, emotionless. I had not even answered when the front door burst open. The lock snapped. The hinges screamed. They flooded in. County Task Force, CPS, and a local SWAT unit. Body armor, helmets, long guns held low, treating me like an armed and dangerous suspect. Everything happened in seconds, but long enough for all 3 children to see it clearly. Evan froze at the foot of the stairs. Mila started coughing violently, gripping the railing. Jonah screamed, his voice breaking. I stepped forward, hands raised on instinct. What is this about? I did not finish the sentence before someone rushed me and slammed me face down onto the floor. A knee pressed into my back, cold wood against my cheek, the smell of old dust. "Don't touch my grandpa!" Evan lunged forward. Another arm grabbed him. "Step back!" The warning was sharp. Mila was clearly struggling to breathe. I heard her calling my name, broken and uneven. Jonah was crying. I tried to turn my head. "Her medication!" I did not finish before my arms were yanked behind me, cold cuffs biting into my skin. CPS came in last. 2 people, light jackets, name badges clipped to their chests. They scanned the room, taking notes. One CPS worker crouched to speak to Mila while an officer radioed for EMS. But in those confused minutes, no one knew where the inhaler was. Evan shouted again, "You don't have the right!" The words were cut off by another voice, higher and clearer, coming from the porch outside. Daphne appeared, light-colored coat, neatly styled hair, clean shoes. In her hand was a phone recording. The lens swept across the wrecked living room, then stopped on me, handcuffed on the floor. "This is a rescue," she said calmly, like she was reading from a script. "I've been trying for years." A strange man stood near the gate, a camera hanging from his neck, a freelance journalist. I recognized it immediately by the way he kept his distance while always finding an angle. Neighbors began to gather, doors cracked open, phones lifted. No one spoke loudly, everyone watched. The police hauled me to my feet, handcuffs on in front of the kids. Evan was shaking, trying to stay steady. Mila wheezed. Jonah called my name through sobs. Daphne stepped closer, never once looking at the children. She adjusted the camera, panned across their stunned faces, then stopped on me. "He's not cooperating," she said. "My children have suffered enough." I opened my mouth. "Mila needs her medicine." A CPS worker signaled a colleague. They searched the kitchen and found the inhaler. A few minutes too late, but enough for her to stabilize. Evan looked at Daphne, his eyes no longer those of a child. You call this a rescue? Daphne did not answer. She only adjusted the angle. They took me outside. Light rain. Neighbors lined the fences. Some covered their mouths. Some filmed. I saw the mailbox. C. Moore was still there. An officer read the search warrant. Flat voice. The basis was an affidavit alleging unlawful confinement, psychological abuse, and unsafe living conditions. I knew immediately. False statements. But the warrant was valid on paper. CPS was present. The procedure was enough to break the door. Someone in the crowd whispered. I could not hear the words. Phones flashed. Daphne stood off to the side, face solemn, as if bearing a great moral burden. The freelance journalist kept shooting. I saw his lens catch the exact moment the cuffs locked. They put me in the back seat of the car. The door shut. Heavy sound. Through the glass, I saw Evan holding Mila, Jonah clutching his shirt. Daphne stepped closer, bent down, and said something. I could not hear it. I only saw Evan shake his head. The car pulled away. Before we even left the neighborhood, a phone inside the vehicle buzzed. An officer glanced at it. The photos are up already. I knew which ones. The Silver Creek Facebook group moves faster than any newspaper. Police rescue children. Grandfather arrested. Comments multiplying by the second. At the station, the questions were brief. I answered directly. No lawyer yet. CPS placed the kids in temporary custody. I objected. They noted it. Paperwork thickened. Time stretched. At noon, I was allowed to see a phone for a few minutes. A photo of me in handcuffs in front of my house. Rain falling. Neighbors watching. The angle was clear. The comments were split. Some doubted. Some concluded. Daphne posted the video. Title, The Final Truth. That night, I sat alone in the holding cell. My back ached. My wrists were bruised. I thought about the medication schedule on the refrigerator, about the EpiPen in the drawer, about Evan standing in front of his siblings. I understood this was only the beginning. The affidavit had opened the door. CPS had stepped inside, and the humiliation had happened publicly, in front of the town, in front of social media. In Silver Creek, there are not many secrets. When the door is broken down at 6 o'clock in the morning, nothing stays private anymore. And I knew that from that moment on, the fight would not be fought in silence. The county jail in Silver Creek is not large, but it is cold enough to make anyone new understand that it was not built to listen. I was taken in after a brief interrogation, the steel door closing with a decisive sound, like a period placed in the middle of an ordinary life. The temporary holding cell had a low ceiling, gray paint peeling from the walls, and the smell of bleach mixed with old sweat. I sat down on the metal bench, my wrists still marked by the cuffs, my back aching from being slammed that morning. No one asked if I was all right. Here, they only check whether you are still breathing. That afternoon, a guard handed me an orange uniform and told me to change. When the door closed again, I realized that the silence in the cell was not calm, but waiting for a story to be told in your place. And outside, that story was being written very fast. The appointed lawyer came the next day. Mark Ellison, a public defender, a man around 40 with neatly cut hair, thin glasses, and careful movements. He shook my hand, his eyes neither avoiding mine nor fully trusting. I've read the file, Mark said. We have a problem. He spoke slowly, as if choosing each word so I would not misunderstand the seriousness. Mark opened the folder. The affidavit was long, detailed, signed, and stamped. The accusations were neatly written. Excessive hoarding, emotional control of minors, and creation of a dependent environment. No need for beatings, no need for injuries, just interpretation. They're using the term emotional captivity, Mark said. It's vague, but it's dangerous. I looked at the paper, trying to find a sentence that reflected the truth I had lived for 14 years. There was none. That evening, the television mounted high in the common area, Turned on. Local news. Images of my house appeared. A wide shot, cedar fence, the mailbox blurred. A banner scrolled below. Children rescued in the Silver Creek. The anchor's voice was neutral, but the visuals were not. The photo of me in handcuffs was chosen as the freeze frame. A short segment called me a grandfather hoarder, a grandfather stuck in the past, dragging his grandchildren into an isolated life. The next day, the local online paper ran a longer article. Emotional captivity. 14 years of control. Neighbor witnesses. Those words spread quickly. The town's Facebook groups shared nonstop. People who used to greet me every morning began using the phrase, "if it's true." Suspicion has a power of its own. It does not need new evidence. It only needs repetition. Inside the jail, news travels faster than visiting hours. Someone recognized me from the screen. "You're that guy," he said. Not loud, but loud enough to spread. "The old man who hurts kids." I did not answer. I had learned over a lifetime that arguing is not always the best defense. But here, silence is not understood as restraint. It is understood as admission. Because of overcrowding, I was placed in a shared temporary unit. There, the television stayed on all night, replaying the local report showing me in handcuffs in front of my house. That night, when the lights went out, a figure moved closer. The punch came without warning, landing in my ribs. I went down, my head hitting the bench. "You think they let people like that alone in here?" someone said. I covered my head and did not fight back. The guards came late. They pulled the other man away and wrote a brief report. I was taken to medical, bandaged, then returned to the cell. No questions, no apology. Mark came back the next day. He saw the bruises. "I'll request a transfer," he said. Then he paused. "You need to understand something. Your silence is being used as evidence. They say you don't push back because you have nothing to push back with." I looked at Mark. "I don't want to turn the kids into targets," I said. "I thought if I stayed quiet, things would cool down." Mark shook his head. "At this stage, not speaking means letting them speak for you." That afternoon, I was allowed a short phone call. I called Evan. His voice tried to stay steady, but I heard the exhaustion. "They ask me a lot of questions," Evan said. "I tell the truth." I reminded him about Mila's medication schedule and to check Jonah's EpiPen. The call ended quickly. I set the receiver down, my hand trembling slightly. That night, I sat alone, my back against the wall. In my mind, simple daily routines replayed, now labeled with unfamiliar names. Checking medication became control. Making food lists became a restriction. Staying together became isolation. I understood what Mark meant. My silence had created a vacuum, and that vacuum had been filled with another story, a story convenient for someone who wanted to take control back. That was the emotional bottom, not because of physical pain, but because I realized I was losing the right to define my own life. When an entire town believes you are a monster, the truth is no longer big enough if you stand alone and do not speak. I looked up at the ceiling, breathing slowly. From that moment on, I knew I had to change how I faced this. Silence was no longer an option. I was released on bail late in the afternoon. There were no congratulations, no sense of relief. Mark Ellison handed me a stack of papers and pointed to the final line. The entire house in Silver Creek put up as collateral. I signed without hesitation. To me, it was not property. It was the place where 3 children had grown up. If it had to be placed on the scale so I could walk free, I was willing. It was raining when I returned. The familiar slope leading into the neighborhood looked the same, but I noticed the change immediately at the gate. A new lock bore the sticker of the enforcing agency. The sticker had been peeled off and reapplied carelessly, as if someone wanted to legitimize coming and going. The cedar fence was pushed out of alignment, shoe prints still clear in the wet ground. I paused for a few seconds before opening the door, as if bracing myself for what waited inside. The door opened, and I knew instantly the house had been searched. Not the frantic mess of a burglar. This was a targeted search. Drawers pulled all the way out, cabinets left open and empty, papers scattered across the floor, important items taken, useless ones left behind. I walked into the living room. The picture frames were gone from the walls. No cracks, no damage. They had been carefully removed. The photographs I had hung for 14 years were no longer there. Only faint dust outlines remained on the wall. I did not touch them. I went straight to the dining table. On the wooden surface I had built myself lay a neatly placed white envelope. It was a temporary no-contact order issued ex parte, effective until a hearing scheduled within a few days. I opened it and read every line. No calls, no messages, no approaching. All forms of contact are prohibited in the best interest of the minors. I read to the end, looked at the judge's signature and the effective date. My hand trembled slightly, but I did not sit down. I stood there until I had read it a second time. I went upstairs to the bedroom. The mattress was flipped. Drawers stood empty. Mayla's medication log, the notebook I always kept on the nightstand, was gone. I went downstairs to the kitchen. The bottom drawer, where I kept Jonah's EpiPen, was empty. I pulled it out, pushed it back in, then pulled it out again as if I might be mistaken. Nothing. I sat down in the chair, my back against the table. There was no sound in the house except the rain tapping on the roof. Near midnight, my phone vibrated. I flinched. Unknown number. I glanced around on instinct, then answered without speaking. "Grandpa?" Evan's voice came through, very small. "I'm calling secretly." I held my breath. "Where are you?" I asked. "A hotel," Evan replied. "Mom locked the room. She won't let us go outside." Evan spoke quickly, as if afraid of being overheard. "She took Mila's and Jonah's phones. I hid an old one." I heard him inhale deeply, trying to steady himself. "She says we're not allowed to contact you anymore." I gripped the phone. "How is Mila?" "No medication," Evan said. I asked. "Mom said it wasn't necessary. Said she was pretending." His voice dropped. "Jonah ate something with peanuts. He started having trouble breathing. I had to knock on the bathroom door and ask the front desk to call medical. Mom yelled at me for overreacting." I closed my eyes. Evan's words fell evenly, precisely, like a report of events he no longer had time to be afraid of. "I recorded it," Evan continued. "I was scared that, if there was nothing, no one would believe us." I did not ask more. I understood why. After everything that had happened, words were no longer enough. Evan gave me the hotel name, the floor, and the room number, then silence. I shouldn't stay on long. "You did the right thing," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Stay safe. Stay with your siblings." Evan hesitated. "Grandpa," he said, his voice breaking this time, "I'm scared." I took a deep breath. "I'm not gone," I said. "I'm still here." The call ended. I set the phone down. Inside the house, everything remained overturned. The bare walls stared back at me. The no-contact order lay on the dining table. I understood exactly what was happening. Cut off access, sever communication, create danger to justify continued custody. This was no longer a vague allegation. This was a calculated action. And I understood the most important thing. Evan, 18 years old, had done the only thing possible at this moment. He recorded not for revenge, but to protect himself and his siblings. In a town where public opinion runs ahead of truth, that recording was the only thing not yet distorted. I stood up, went room to room, closed the doors, and turned on the porch light. Outside, the rain kept falling. Night in Silver Creek was long and heavy. I knew from this moment on, everything had crossed beyond ordinary legal boundaries. When medication is taken away, when phones are confiscated, when children are locked inside a hotel room, it is no longer a custody dispute. It is control. And this fight will not end in silence. The next morning, I went back to the county police station. The rain was still falling lightly, the kind that does not soak you immediately, but makes your coat heavier with every step. I brought my bail paperwork, a short written note of what Evan had told me, and in my head, a remaining naive belief. If I presented the facts correctly, the system would respond. The duty officer listened from beginning to end. I did not raise my voice. I did not assign blame. I simply listed facts. Children being kept in a hotel, phones confiscated, Mila's asthma medication taken, Jonah having had an allergic reaction. He nodded and typed the information into the computer. When my file came up on the screen, his expression changed very quickly. Not hostile, not sympathetic, just distant. "You are a suspect in an ongoing investigation," he said evenly, like quoting a line. I asked about emergency procedures when children face medical risk. He pointed to a line in internal policy. "All complaints from you must go through your attorney or CPS." I mentioned the recording. He shook his head. He said they could not accept it directly while I was the subject of the investigation. Any materials had to be submitted by counsel to preserve procedure. I asked whether CPS had been informed that the medication had been taken. He did not answer directly. "I would advise you not to complicate the situation further." There was no argument, no confrontation, just a door closing in full compliance with the rules. I left the station feeling like I had walked in a full circle only to end up exactly where I started, heavier now because I understood I was no longer seen as someone who needed protection. Around noon, Mark Ellison called. His voice was low. "They have their own attorney. They want a meeting." We met at a short-term rental office near the town center. No signage, no logo, just a small conference room, a pressed wood table, frosted glass doors. Mark arrived early. I arrived on time. The other party arrived last. Victoria Hale entered like someone accustomed to rooms like this. Neat attire, organized files, measured movements. She placed a thick envelope on the table, slid it toward me, and only then sat down. "We want to reduce tension," she said. "No small talk, no extra emotion. A temporary solution to avoid escalation." I did not touch the envelope. Victoria continued, her tone even, like reading clauses. $75,000. In exchange, you sign an affidavit of non-interference. You agree to no contact, no involvement, no additional disputes while the matter is being resolved. Mark leaned forward, but I raised a hand to stop him. I opened the envelope. The check lay on top. The amount was printed clearly. I set it back on the table. "What about my grandchildren?" I asked. Victoria did not dodge the question, but she did not answer it either. "CPS is monitoring the situation." I asked about Mila's medication. "Temporary measures." I asked about the confiscated phones. "To stabilize the environment." I asked about Evan's recording. "We have not accessed it." The room went quiet for a few seconds. Victoria looked at me longer than necessary, as if weighing something. Then she lowered her voice, not whispering, but speaking so only those in the room could hear. "You don't understand how much money you're standing in front of." The sentence was not a threat. It was an invitation, a door left open for someone who knew when to step back. I looked at the check one more time, then picked up the envelope. I tore the check in half, tore it again. The pieces fell onto the table. "No," I said. One word, no explanation. Victoria looked at the torn paper, then at me. For the first time, her confidence shifted into reassessment. She gathered her file and stood. "You're choosing the hard road," she said. I nodded. "I know." She paused at the door, turned back halfway. "We'll proceed according to process," I replied. "So will I." When the door closed, Mark exhaled slowly. "They wanted to buy your silence," he said. I looked through the frosted glass at the rain-soaked street. "They want me to stand still," I said, "but I can't." That night, I returned home. The no-contact orders still lay on the dining table. My phone held no messages. I understood very clearly what had just happened. The law does not turn its back with a shove. It only steps half a pace away, just enough for you to realize you're standing alone. Victoria's words kept echoing in my head. "You don't understand how much money you're standing in front of." I understood perfectly. I simply did not accept the price attached. And I knew that from the moment I tore that envelope apart, there was no room left for compromise. The fight had entered a stage from which there was no turning back. After the meeting with Victoria Hale, I understood one thing clearly. If I kept knocking on doors with signs and seals, I would only receive more paperwork stacked against me. What I needed was not a ruling right now, but the truth beneath the surface. And to find that, I had to turn to someone who once made a living following money trails, Rowan Pike. Rowan was no longer a county financial investigator. His name had disappeared from the licensing list nearly a decade ago. No prison sentence, no clear conclusion, just a suspended credential after an internal matter the local press called a methodological conflict. Rowan once told me, when it first happened, that he was not punished for being wrong, but for looking too closely at places others preferred to ignore. Rowan's office sat hidden behind an old printer repair shop on the edge of town. No sign, no receptionist, just a narrow staircase leading to the second floor, where the smell of old paper and dried ink had settled over the years. Rowan opened the door on my second knock. He studied me for a few seconds, long enough to know I was not there over something small. "I know what you're looking for," he said. "All of Silver Creek is talking about you." We sat across from each other at an old wooden desk. I gave Rowan everything I had: Daphne's legal information, old addresses, bank documents that once listed me as guardian when the kids were underage, and Evan's recording describing what was happening at the hotel. Rowan made no comments. He simply turned each page, typed a few lines into his computer, and opened additional data windows whose sources I did not recognize. "Don't expect miracles," Rowan said without looking up. "Money doesn't disappear, it just moves." 3 days later, Rowan called me back. This time the desk was no longer cluttered. Papers were sorted, clipped neatly. Rowan pointed to the first summary sheet. "Daphne's declared income cannot support this level of spending," he said. No sarcasm, just professional conclusion. The numbers were clear: extended stay hotels, flexible airfare, recurring consulting fees, regular purchases, no signs of impulse. Everything pointed to a planned lifestyle. Rowan flipped to the next page. "This is an LLC," he said, "registered in another state. No employees, no real business activity. The LLC received money and then moved it along quickly." "It doesn't create value," Rowan said. "It just sits in the middle." The next page left me silent. "Offshore accounts," Rowan said. "Not illegal if fully disclosed, but here they aren't." The funds were broken up, moved through multiple layers, then consolidated again. This was not how an assistant living on salary moved money. This was how someone hid origins. I asked Rowan where the money came from. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he opened another diagram. "There are consistent inbound transfers," he said. "Not wages, not commissions, not loans." He paused. "And there's something else." Rowan pulled out a thinner file. "Daphne appears as a representative in a financial structure involving minors," he said. "Not activated, but prepared." I looked at him. Rowan clarified slowly, word by word. "A children's trust fund." The air in the room shifted. I just asked about beneficiaries. Rowan shook his head. "The documents are tightly shielded, but the indicators suggest the focus is not welfare. It's control." He pointed to draft clauses. Who holds decision authority? Who triggers activation? Who can withdraw? We sat quietly for several minutes. I looked at the figures, no longer surprised. The pieces began to lock together. The cash offer to make me stand still, the no contact order, the confiscation of medication, the children kept in a hotel, and now a financial structure waiting to be unlocked. None of it was random. It served a long-term objective. Rowan gathered the files. "If you keep going," he said, "you'll need patience, and you need to understand. Touching a trust fund means touching people who don't like light." I nodded. "I don't need fast," I said. "I need right." When I left the office, it was dark. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. I did not feel lighter, but I felt more certain. This money did not belong to a mother living on an assistance income. It belonged to a pre-built plan, where children were the necessary condition to unlock benefits. That night, I went home, sat at the wooden dining table, and looked at the empty spaces on the wall, where family photos once hung. I understood then that this story had never been just a family dispute. It was a fight for control over a stream of money, disguised in the language of protection and best interests. And if Rowan was right, if that trust fund was waiting to be activated, then everything I had endured so far was only the opening move. Rowan did not call me the moment he found it. He waited another 2 days to cross-check. "I don't want to hand you anything that isn't clean enough," he said when I came to his office. On the desk lay a thin file, not thick, but heavy in its own way. Heavy because every page could change the direction of the case. Rowan opened the first page. "The year 2009, he said. "She signed an affidavit of abandonment and intent." I read the title, every word. There was nothing about selling children. No clause transferring permanent custody. The document recorded the departure from the family residence, non-participation in caregiving, and an expressed intent not to interfere for an extended period, with no specified return date. At the bottom was Daphne's signature. The date was clear, properly notarized. Rowan flipped to the next page. $20,000, he said, "a one-time payment." I looked at the transaction record. The sender was clearly listed as me, Calvin Moore. The source of funds was described generally, sufficient for legality, but not tied to any custodial rights. Rowan pointed to the memo line. Not child support, not alimony. This was assistance to enable her departure, transferred on the same day the affidavit was signed. He opened another plastic sleeve. Inside were photographs. Daphne standing next to an older used car she had just purchased, keys in her hand. The photo date matched the transfer date. There was no bright smile, just the relief of someone who had shed a major responsibility. Rowan did not comment. He let me connect it myself. "Let me be clear," Rowan continued, his voice slowing. "This is not a document selling children. In this state, no one can sell or transfer motherhood with an affidavit." He tapped the paper lightly. "But it is evidence of intentional abandonment. And more importantly, it shows deception when she returned with the rescue narrative." I asked about the risk. Rowan explained step by step, leaving nothing out. "This affidavit establishes abandonment," he said. "It shows she left voluntarily, accepted financial assistance provided by you, and failed to perform parental duties for many years. When she comes back, she cannot pretend this all started yesterday." Rowan turned to the legal notes. "Second," he said, "it defeats the kidnapping claim." I looked at him. When abandonment is documented in writing combined with a long period of non-interference, the caregiver who remains cannot be considered a kidnapper, especially when there is medical, educational, and daily life documentation. He pointed to the records I had previously provided. "Third," Rowan went on, "bad faith." He emphasized the words. "When she files a new affidavit accusing you of control and confinement, while concealing the fact that she previously signed abandonment and accepted money to leave, that is bad faith. Courts hate that." I sat quietly. In my mind, the years no longer blurred. The nights rushing Mila to the hospital for breathing attacks, Jonah's allergic reactions, parent-teacher meetings with only my signature on the line. And now, an old document explained why everything had fallen on my shoulders from the beginning. Rowan gathered the photos and slid them back into the folder. "We'll use this correctly," he said. "No public dumping, no headlines, only when necessary." I asked about the other side's response. Rowan exhaled. "They'll claim coercion. They'll claim misunderstanding. But the signature, the notarization, and the money trail from you will not move. People lie. Records don't." I stood up. My hands were steady, not from anger, but from clarity. "I don't want to smear anyone," I said. I just want the truth seen correctly. Rowan nodded. Then you're holding the right thing. On the way home, light rain fell. I thought about the headline people love to use. Selling children. It provokes outrage, but it's wrong. What I was holding was not an inflammatory story. It was legal proof showing who left, who stayed, and who is lying now. And I understood that from this moment on, every accusation built on my silence began to crack. That affidavit did not purchase maternal love. It did only one thing. It killed the fabricated story being used to strip me of my right to be a grandfather. I did not discover the truth in a heroic way. I discovered it the way an old carpenter would, slowly, carefully, through small traces others overlooked. That afternoon in Silver Creek, the rain still fell thin and steady like it always does. Rowan and I sat in his temporary rented office, a place with no sign, only the smell of old paper and bitter coffee. He told me, the dirtiest part isn't in the accusations, it's in why they had to blow this up so big. Rowan set a thicker printout in front of me, more than 7 pages. This was no longer an old affidavit. This was a file with a proper header, case codes, and legal language so cold my hands tightened on their own. He spoke slowly, as if afraid I might miss it. You want to know why Daphne was willing to turn you into a monster in front of the whole town? Because there is a trust fund? I looked at him. Rowan did not circle it. $12 million, he said, set aside for the 3 kids. For a moment, I thought I had misheard, not because I had never seen money, but because I had never imagined my life being crushed under a number that large, one that existed without my knowledge. Rowan slid another page across. And there's more, he said, his voice dropping. The trust includes an allowance clause for the guardian, paying $400,000 a year, covering housing and management costs, without touching the principal, set aside for the children. He tapped the words, guardian stipend, like tapping bare truth. That money doesn't touch the kids' share. It's a management reward. I sat motionless. In my head, everything I once thought were motives, resentment, jealousy, pride, suddenly shrank. If this fund was real, then everything Daphne had done was no longer emotional. It was a plan. The first question that came out of me was simple. Where did the money come from? Rowan answered with a name that dried my throat instantly. Nathan Cross. The name hit me like a splinter kicked back from a saw blade. I had heard it before, vaguely, like a shadow, not worth naming. Rowan was precise. Nathan Cross is the biological father of the 3 children. He paused to let it settle. Not the man in Daphne's wedding photos. Not anyone this town ever knew. Nathan Cross is an illegitimate son of a lumber industry magnate. The trust money comes from that branch of the family. I frowned. If that's true, why didn't I know? Rowan exhaled. Because they didn't want you to know, and because you weren't a party entitled to notice in the original filings. He flipped a few pages and pointed to a small print section. Trusts like this are usually built through private attorneys with confidentiality clauses and independent trustees. The beneficiaries are the children. The adults around them only find out when guardianship procedures are triggered or when there's a dispute. I still wasn't fully convinced. Rowan understood. He gave me a second piece, one that didn't rely on inference. I traced Daphne's money, he said. Remember Section 6? Shell LLC, offshore accounts, spending far beyond a real estate assistant's income. I found a series of small, regular transfers, always capped just low enough to avoid flags. Those transfers come from a management entity tied to cross-family holdings. I looked at the lines, the odd amounts, the timing. Rowan didn't need to explain further. I saw the picture form on its own. Daphne was not poor. Daphne was performing poverty, and after performing it long enough, she came back to Silver Creek to claim something bigger. I spoke slowly. But the trust belongs to the kids. She can't just take it. Rowan nodded. Correct. She can't touch the children's principal at will, but she can control the flow. She can choose schools, housing, services, approved expenses, and most importantly, she only receives the $400,000 a year and the house if she is the sole legal guardian. Rowan looked straight at me and said the sentence I wish I never had to hear. That's why you're the obstacle? Not because she misses the kids, not because she regrets anything, but because you hold de facto caregiver status, the one the court can recognize. As long as you're still standing there, she can't take full control. I replayed everything that had happened. The 6 a.m. raid, me being slammed to the floor, Daphne standing behind the camera, neatly dressed, strangers gathering by the gate, a freelance journalist appearing at exactly the right moment, posts in the town group spreading faster than storm warnings. It all looked like a pre-built campaign, not a spontaneous reaction, an opening strike to clear the path. I asked, soul guardianship, how do they get that? Rowan answered like someone who had read too many files to stay naive. They destroy your credibility. They make you look dangerous. They make CPS and the court see you as a risk. Then they ask for emergency orders. If you react too strongly, they use that. If you stay quiet, they turn your silence into evidence. That's how they corner you. I felt a chill, not from fear, but from recognition. They had calculated exactly my kind of person, someone who doesn't speak well in public, doesn't understand social media, doesn't know legal games, and certainly isn't used to being called a monster. Rowan opened a drawer and pulled out a printed calendar. And this is their deadline, he said. She's booked a flight. I looked. One line stood out clearly. Private jet, departure time, destination, British Columbia. I looked at Rowan. Why does she need to fly? Rowan answered. Possibly to meet the trust managers, attorneys, or whoever is behind it, or to move the kids out of your reach before you can turn the situation. He didn't speculate recklessly. He simply laid the facts down. But the timing lines up perfectly. It comes right after she blew up the rescue narrative, and right before the hearing she's aiming for. I thought of Evan, 18 years old, not hardened enough to protect himself from adult schemes, but old enough to know who stayed. I thought of Mila, her medication schedule, the nights wheezing for breath. I thought of Jonah and the EpiPen always kept in the drawer by the sink, because 1 minute late could mean no coming back. Those were real life, and with Daphne I saw it clearly now. The kids had been turned into keys to open a vault. Rowan said, "You need to prepare 2 things." I asked, "What 2?" He answered, "First, proof that she is not providing adequate care right now, especially medically. Second, proof that she's acting for financial gain, not the children's best interests." He looked at me. "You already have your part. 14 years of caregiving records. Now we have to connect it to the trust." I took a long breath. I didn't feel rich. I felt faced with an ugly truth. Some battles don't start with family. They start with money. And in that kind of fight, the one dragged out as the target was me, an old man in Silver Creek, living quietly, working with wood, wanting only for the kids to be safe. Rowan closed the file. "From the moment you learn the number 12 million, everything has to move at a different pace," he said. "You can't just react. You have to act." I nodded, but another thought was pounding in my head. If Daphne had a private jet booked, it meant she believed she was about to win. And the scariest part was this. She didn't need to win on truth. She only needed to win on procedure, speed, and moving the kids out of the place where they were protected. I stood up slowly. I didn't say anything dramatic. I said only one thing to keep myself anchored. "I'm not fighting for money. I'm fighting for the 3 kids." Rowan looked at me and nodded once. "Good. Then we'll use their money to protect them from the person trying to take it." When I stepped out of the office, Silver Creek rain was still falling. But this time, I wasn't lost the way I had been weeks earlier. I knew why they were doing this. I knew the real objective. And I understood that if that flight took off, The game would move to another field, one where an old man like me would have even less reach. From that day on, I set a personal deadline. Stop them before they could shut the legal door. And I knew that to do it, I needed more than innocence. I needed strategy. I needed evidence. And I needed a turn strong enough to force the entire town, the people calling me a monster, to look again and see who the predator really was in this story. Rowan didn't let me act on instinct. He forced everything to have sources. That night, he called me, his voice low and precise. "We have the flight," he said. Not speculation, not rumor. He traced it through 3 independent leads: a payment record from a private jet management company, an early submitted departure clearance request, and an internal coordination email, forwarded by mistake, enough to lock down the date, time, and the small airfield where the jet would depart. Daphne wasn't flying commercial. She chose an airfield on the edge of the neighboring town, where scrutiny is light, procedures are fast, and children can be loaded before anyone has time to react. Rowan sent me a simple diagram: access road, fence line, control tower, and one short note: if they taxi out, we lose local jurisdiction leverage. I read it, closed the phone. At that moment, everything was clear. It was no longer about whether they would leave, but how to stop them in a way that kept the kids here. We reached the airfield while the sky was still gray. It wasn't a major airport, just a strip of asphalt cutting through dew-soaked grass, low chain-link fencing, a small control tower, enough for a few private charter flights. Rowan didn't say much on the drive. He only reminded me once, his voice flat: "If you cross this line, everything shifts to federal law." I nodded. I had understood the moment I saw the flight schedule. The white jet sat at the far end of the runway, nose pointed north. Its lights were already on, cold beams sweeping across the ground. I spotted Evan first, standing near the van door, shoulders tight, eyes darting. Mila sat close to the door, arms wrapped around her medication bag. Jonah stood beside her, backpack unzipped, the EpiPen clipped at his side. Daphne was up front, coat neat, talking to someone holding a radio. Everything looked ready. Rowan stopped the car at the edge of the lot. "You have 2 paths," he said without turning to look at me. "Call lawyers and the airfield manager, slow, or block the wheels, fast but with consequences." I opened the door. Cold mist hit my face. I stepped out without rushing. I drove onto the runway. No horn, no acceleration. I positioned the car perpendicular to the takeoff path and stopped in the middle of the asphalt. The jet's lights shone straight through my windshield. White light flattened everything, leaving no shadows. I stared forward, hands on the steering wheel. Steady. A voice came over a loudspeaker, tangled in the wind. I didn't catch every word, only the order to move the vehicle. I didn't move. I opened the door, stepped out, raised my hands to shoulder height so they could see I was unarmed. I spoke loudly and slowly. 3 children with medical conditions. No complete medical clearance. I am the caregiver. No one answered. The lights stayed on. Rowan jogged over, stopping a few steps away. "Calvin," he said, just loud enough for me. "They've called federal." I nodded. I knew. I also knew the cost. The taser fired from behind me, sharp and dry. Electricity took my legs instantly. I collapsed, tipping sideways, my face hitting the cold, dew-wet runway. 2 people rushed in, pinning my shoulders down. They pulled my arms behind my back and cinched the cuffs tight. Cold metal locked onto bare wrists. I didn't shout. I didn't resist. I lifted my head while being held down. Between 2 uniformed bodies, I saw the 3 children standing several dozen steps away. Evan shouted my name. Mila began struggling to breathe, one hand clutching her chest, the other fumbling for her medication. Jonah dropped to his knees, digging into the backpack for the EpiPen, his movements clumsy with panic. Not far away, Daphne stood still. She didn't come closer. She didn't ask anything. She held her phone at eye level, the lens aimed straight at me in cuffs on the runway, recording everything. "Federal aviation interference," someone said. The words landed like a label. More lights switched on. Cameras appeared quickly from somewhere. People moved fast, fingers pointed. Voices murmured. No one asked why an old man blocked a runway. They only captured the moment he was handcuffed. They pulled me to my feet. I straightened my back. I turned my head, searched for the kids' eyes. I spoke loud enough for them to hear. "Stay put. Remember the meds." Evan nodded, face pale. Mila looked at me, lips trembling. Jonah clutched the backpack. It was the second time in my life I had seen that kind of fear in their eyes when I wasn't close. The jet's engines shut down. The lights dimmed. The coordinator spoke into a radio. Rowan stepped forward, showed his credentials, spoke quickly and firmly. I couldn't hear the words, only saw the movement stop. Wheel chocks went in. The door stayed closed. I was led aside, straight into a wall of cameras. White light blasted my face. Someone asked my name. I answered. Someone asked why. I stayed silent. This silence was different from before. It was deliberate. It had witnesses. An officer read my rights. I heard enough to understand. I nodded. I wasn't arguing here. I knew this wasn't the place for long truth. It was a place for short procedure. As the vehicle took me away from the runway, I looked back one last time. The jet was still. The kids hadn't gone anywhere. Daphne still held her phone. Her face couldn't hide the irritation. I memorized that face under the airfield lights, light that favors no one. Inside the car, Rowan spoke quietly, just one sentence. "You bought time." I leaned my head back. My wrists throbbed. I thought about the price of freedom. It isn't money. It's being named in public, labeled on camera, in exchange for a door that hasn't closed yet. Behind us, the flashing lights faded. I didn't know what the news would call me tonight, but I knew that tomorrow morning that jet would still be here, and the 3 children would not have been taken away. That was enough, for one night, for one necessary step back. I accepted the cuffs as a deposit, because there are freedoms that if you don't pay for them now, you lose forever. I was taken straight from the station to the prison ward of the county hospital. They said it was mandatory procedure after being tased. Cardiac monitoring, respiration, risk of syncope, and because I was in temporary custody, I had to be placed in a guarded unit. The door closed behind me with a short, dry click. Barred window, camera in the ceiling corner, a steel table bolted to the floor. Around my wrist was a plastic band with my name, case number, and admission time. I lay there, my back against the thin mattress, listening to the heart monitor beep steadily. The first thing I noticed, the guard shift didn't match standard rotation. The initial guard was young, hesitant to look at me, occasionally glancing at the monitor before turning away. Near midnight, he was replaced. No announcement, no greeting. The new guard walked in with a stiff gait, broad shoulders, thick neck. He didn't ask for information, didn't check the handoff sheet in front of me. He just sat down, pulled his chair back from the door, placed a magazine on his lap, eyes never touching the page. I called out, "Hey!" No response. I asked again, "What's your name?" Still nothing. That was the second detail. Hospital guards usually give minimal responses because they work in a system with cameras, reports, accountability. That kind of silence only has 2 explanations. Either the person doesn't want to trace, or he isn't part of the group that has to answer. I didn't jump to conclusions. I just remembered it. Sometime later, the door opened. A woman pushed in a medical cart. Clean uniform, hair tied back, mask on. But there was no proper hospital name badge on her chest, the kind usually clipped under the department logo. I noticed because the room lighting wasn't dim. She spoke quickly, evenly. "I'm here to cover the night shift, giving you an injection so you can rest." I asked what medication. She said, "Light sedative." I asked whose order. She didn't answer that, just rolled the cart closer and raised the syringe. The syringe had a label, but the patient name and ID didn't match my wristband. In the system, there was no sedative order logged. I looked at the barrel and the needle hub. No secondary label, no drug code, no handwritten tape like standard protocol. I'm not a doctor, but I've lived long enough to know hospitals don't inject anonymous medication into a detainee without reading back name, date of birth, and drug name on camera. She skipped all of it. I couldn't fight with strength. My chest still hurt where the prongs hit. My legs were weak. But I still had two things left: time and awareness. I spoke louder, enough for the guard outside to hear, "What's the attending physician's name?" She paused for a fraction of a second, then deflected. The doctor ordered it. I said, "Show me the medical order." She didn't. She stepped closer to the bed, holding the needle at the precise angle of someone who had done this many times. I looked into her eyes. No care, no night shift fatigue, just cold urgency. I pressed the nurse call button. The alarm didn't sound immediately. There was a delay. I pressed it again. She glanced at the monitor, then back at me. I said deliberately, "I will not accept any injection without a written order." She didn't argue. She advanced, left hand pulling at the IV line, right hand angling the needle toward the port. My left arm was restrained to the bed rail per custody protocol, but my right leg could still move. I waited until she leaned in closest. I kicked hard at the shin just below the knee. It wasn't a clean kick, just a reflex strike from someone who understood that if the needle went in, everything ended right there. She made a muffled sound behind the mask and stumbled. The syringe flew from her hand, hit the floor, shattered. Liquid splashed out, spreading in a thin streak. I shouted, "Get a nurse! There's a stranger!" The guard outside jumped to his feet, but instead of restraining the nurse, he stepped back half a pace like someone caught standing in the wrong role. That was when the call alarm finally sounded. A real nurse ran in first, another staff member right behind. They saw the broken syringe, the spill, the woman. The nurse fired questions. "Which unit are you from?" The woman didn't answer. She turned and walked straight out, fast. I watched and saw one final thing. The guard didn't stop her. He cleared the way. That was the third detail, and it was the most important one. Just minutes later, the room filled up. The on-call physician was summoned. They photographed the scene according to protocol, because this was a custodial ward with cameras. They collected samples of the spilled liquid and sealed them. I heard them murmuring to each other, "No medical order, no badge, no name tag." I didn't need further confirmation. I already knew. They moved me to a different room and replaced the guard. This time there were two. Proper protocol. Names clearly displayed. They rechecked my heart, took my blood pressure, documented the incident. On paper, it would be called an incident. In reality, it was an attempted killing wrapped in a lab coat. I lay still, breathing slowly, forcing my mind to stay sharp. Because I understood immediately. If they were willing to try this in a hospital, it meant someone had paid and arranged the path. And if I had just stopped a needle, then Rowan, the one holding the money trail, was also in their sights. At the same time, back in Silver Creek, Rowan didn't go home. He went straight to my house. He needed what was missing: Mayla's medical records, Jonah's allergy list, copies of the medication schedules, and the yellow envelope I had told him about earlier, the one I instructed him to open only when everything had been pushed past the point of no return. The house had been sealed with Barb, "Do not enter" tape from the prior search. But in this situation, Rowan faced an ugly necessity. Either leave the evidence where someone else could take it first, or go in himself and accept the risk. He didn't use the front door. He went around back. Before he even touched the lock, he heard footsteps on gravel. Not neighbors, not police. 3 figures separated out of the dark. Tactical flashlights cutting short. Controlled beams, not blinding, just enough to disorient. A man's voice said, "Mr. Holt said you might come back. No names, no legal warning, just a contractor's message." Rowan didn't ask questions. He stepped back, turned, and ran. They didn't shoot. They used something else, a taser. Rowan heard the metallic click as it armed. He dove sideways just in time. The prongs slammed into the wooden wall behind him. He slipped through the laundry room window at the back, where the frame had been loosened during the earlier search. He entered the house in darkness, closed the window without a hard sound, then ran down the hallway, straight to my bedroom. He knew the house. He knew where I kept important things. But he also knew they had already searched. So he didn't check the closet or rummage obvious drawers. He did exactly what I had told him. Pull the rug, find the floorboard with the faint scratch, pry it up with fingernails and a small blade. The yellow envelope lay inside a thin wooden box, sealed in a moisture-proof zip bag. Rowan tucked it into his jacket just as the bedroom door was kicked in. 3 men rushed in. They didn't carry exposed knives. They only needed to block exits and threaten enough to make Rowan understand he should abandon what he was after. They weren't there to arrest him. They were there to make him disappear as an accident. Rowan didn't fight to win. He fought to escape. He swung the brass lamp from the nightstand, smashing it into the nearest man, creating a single beat of space. That beat was enough. He bolted for the window. Glass shattered. He jumped from the second floor. He landed in bushes, skin torn, legs screaming with pain, barely able to bear weight, but the yellow envelope was still tight against his chest. He crawled under the fence, rolled into a neighbor's yard, and lay flat in tall grass, holding his breath. Flashlights swept low across the ground. They passed within a few yards. They didn't see him. Rowan stayed still until the footsteps faded, then dragged himself up. He didn't call emergency services. He didn't go to a hospital. He understood the hospital was where someone had just brought a syringe to my bedside. He chose the harder route, slipping through woods, circling wide, changing clothes, concealing blood, heading straight to the only place he trusted to deliver the envelope without being intercepted. The next morning, when I saw Rowan in the visitation room, he walked in with a torn shoulder seam, a swollen eye, a split lip. He placed the yellow envelope on the table like something with legal weight. I didn't ask where he hurt. I asked only one thing. "Did you get it?" Rowan nodded. "Got it." I looked at the envelope. I understood everything clearly. Someone wanted me dead, not out of personal hatred, but because what Rowan and I were holding would shatter their plan, and because they tried it in a hospital and sent people to intercept Rowan at my house. It meant they were sprinting. I leaned back in the chair and spoke quietly but clearly. From now on, everything goes through records, through cameras, through procedure. Rowan didn't elaborate. He answered only what mattered. I logged times, descriptions, routes. I'll write the report. The envelope never left my possession from the moment I took it to the moment I walked in here. I closed my eyes for a second, not to rest, to reorder my thoughts. I had kept my life. Rowan had kept the evidence, and they, the ones who thought they could do everything in the dark, had left footprints in the most surveilled place possible. I opened my eyes and looked at Rowan. "Now it's our turn." Rowan nodded. "Yeah, and this time they'll have to answer with paperwork, not blades." The courtroom opened its doors very early, but when I was led inside, every seat was already filled. People from Silver Creek were there in full. Neighbors, teachers, a few familiar shop owners, even faces that had stood by the fence that morning. Cameras were set close to the aisle, lights burning white, and no one needed to be told to keep order. Curiosity did that for them. I sat at the table on the right, with Mark Ellison behind me as counsel, but I asked the judge for permission to present the facts and records myself. Daphne appeared last. She wore dark clothes, hair neatly styled, her hands trembling just enough for the cameras to catch. When the judge asked her name, she answered with a choked voice. She spoke of fear, of years of being controlled, of a forced rescue. Tears fell on cue. The prosecutor nodded. A few murmurs rippled through the back rows. I did not turn around. The first witness was a neighbor. He said I was withdrawn, unfriendly, that I seemed to keep the children inside. No dates, no times, just impressions. The second witness said she had heard Mila coughing at night and had been concerned. No one said they called emergency services. No one said they knocked on the door to check. They told the story they believed the courtroom wanted to hear. Then it was my turn. The judge looked at me for a long second and nodded. I stood without papers in my hands. I spoke. Briefly. I submit records. I presented the notarized affidavit of abandonment and intent. I read the key section aloud, slowly and clearly, so the entire room could hear. Departure from the family residence. Non-interference. No defined return date. I followed with the one-time transfer record, dated the same day as the signature originating from me. I said only one sentence. Assistance to leave, not child support. No more. I submitted photographs, photos of Daphne receiving the car, matching date and time. I submitted Mila's medical schedules, Jonah's allergy lists, years of parent-teacher meeting records bearing only my signature. I did not boast. I only connected the timeline. I said, care is not a promise. It is a pattern of repeated acts. The judge asked for the notarization seal to be magnified on the screen. The courtroom went completely silent. Victoria, the attorney, stood to object, her voice sharp, talking about context, about coercion, about misunderstanding. The judge asked, was there any complaint filed at the time of signing? Victoria fell silent. The judge asked again, any medical order or report alleging coercion? There was none. I thought that would be the end. Then Evan stood up. He did not look at me first. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, he said, his voice steadier than 18 years should allow. He handed his phone to the clerk. A recording. I made it myself. The audio played. Daphne's voice filled the room, clear and dry, without tears, without the performance of a grieving mother. It was a private phone call between her and the man coordinating the trust fund, later identified as the legal representative of the assets. Daphne spoke plainly, without hesitation. I already told you, if I don't secure signing authority, what am I coming back for? The fund only works with the guardian. The room stalled. A short, heavy silence. Then her voice continued, faster. The fund is there. I just need guardianship. Once we leave, it's done. On the other end, a low male voice replied quietly, enough to catch words about procedure and signing timeline. No one in the courtroom breathed loudly. Everyone understood this was not a slip. It was a plan. Evan lifted his head and added one sentence without being asked. I have full time stamps, recording location and the recipient's number. Original file, unedited. Daphne jumped to her feet. She screamed that it was fabricated, that the boy had been coached. She lunged toward the clerk's table. The judge struck the gavel. Sit down. She did not. 2 officers moved in. She pulled away. The cuffs closed in the middle of the courtroom. Camera lights hit full glare. This was not a tragic moment. It was a consequential one. Victoria kept talking, louder than necessary. The judge stopped her and looked directly at her. You were aware of this affidavit, correct? Victoria evaded. You had a duty to disclose. The judge turned to the clerk. Note contempt. Refer to the disciplinary committee. The gavel struck again. No one applauded, but many eyes shifted. I sat down. There was no feeling of victory in me, only a strange calm. I looked at Evan. He nodded slightly. Mila hugged her medication bag, breathing evenly. Jonah gripped the zipper of his backpack. All 3 were staying. The judge ruled briefly. Emergency orders suspended. Status quo of care maintained. Independent investigation ordered into false statements. Medical and financial records sealed. No lecture, no theatrics. The courtroom rose. As people filed out, cameras followed Daphne being led away. I did not look. I looked at the 3 children. I said quietly, we're going home. There was no cheer, just a nod, enough for me to know the truth when placed correctly, does not need to be loud. The decision was issued on a gray morning, rain falling as fine as dust. No cameras crowding in, no grand statements. Just a thin document, cleanly signed, yet strong enough to remove every shackle that had been placed on me over the long months. All charges against me were dismissed in full, not out of pity, not out of goodwill, but because the truth had taken its rightful place, and once it stood there, every fabricated story collapsed on its own. The court upheld my guardianship, no conditions attached, no probationary period. Those who once doubted fell silent. Those who once stood watching by the fence turned away, not out of shame, but because the story no longer left room for them to insert themselves. For the 3 children, the ruling was not a victory. It was simply the return of a familiar rhythm. Mornings measured by medication schedules, evenings checking food bags, nights closing doors early when Mila struggled to breathe in the cold. The trust fund was locked. The mechanism was simple, tight, without shortcuts. No one could withdraw a single dollar until each child reached legal age. I had no access to the principal. I didn't want it. My role was responsibility, not benefit. Theirs was a future, not bait. When the judge read the final clause, I saw Evan exhale. Mila clutched her medication bag. Jonah nodded faintly, as if everything had just fallen back into proper order. A few weeks later, Rowan sent me a short message, stripped of emotion. Daphne's case had been separated. Prosecutors were pursuing charges of perjury, procedural fraud, and conspiracy to interfere with guardianship. No dramatic arrest, no handcuff photos on the news. Just a quiet, prolonged investigation. For her, that was the heaviest sentence. Daphne was stripped of all rights relating to the children. Any petitions for access were placed under strict supervision. The trust fund was closed with her name completely removed. The door of money, the thing she had come back to claim, was shut forever. We did not stay in Silver Creek, not out of fear, but because we needed space to breathe. The familiar roads carried too many lingering whispers. I sold the old car, gathered what we needed, and bought an RV large enough for the 4 of us to live simply. Not fancy, not new, but clean, solid, and quiet. On departure day, the rain eased. I locked the house one last time, placed the key in an envelope, and left it on the table. No note needed. Those who needed to understand would. Before leaving, I returned to the woodshop. The smell of old timber was still there, mixed with machine oil soaked into the floor. I shut off the breaker, wiped down the workbench, arranged the tools by old habit. The dining table I had built for the kids still stood there, the small scratch in the corner, the mark of years lived honestly, used honestly. I hung the closed sign on its hook with no reopening date. Some things, once finished, don't need to continue. The journey had no fixed itinerary. We drove slowly, stopped when needed, cooked meals in quiet rest areas. Evan learned to check engine oil. Mila set medication reminders with a small bell. Jonah labeled every food container. In the evenings, we sat closer together, not out of fear of losing anything, but because we felt complete. No one talked about money. No one mentioned court. Those things stayed behind where they belonged. One afternoon, parked at the edge of a wide valley with a soft wind blowing, I sat on the RV step and watched the 3 kids handle their own tasks. No reminders, no checking. I realized there are things that cannot be taken away, no matter how hard someone tries. Routines built from responsibility, trust formed by showing up on time, safety born from knowing who will stay when things get hard. I do not carry resentment. Resentment corrodes time. I do not need forgiveness to keep living either. I simply choose not to carry it. Some people are born into titles. Others choose actions, and actions repeated long enough become family. As night fell, we lit a small fire. Evan talked about school. Mila read a few pages from a book. Jonah carefully placed the EpiPen back into its familiar compartment. I looked at them and saw no numbers, no files, no clauses. I saw 3 children growing up the right way, slowly, steadily, and untouched by someone else's greed. Before putting out the fire, I said one sentence, without emphasis, without an audience, only so I could hear it clearly myself. Some people are born parents. Some people only give birth. The RV rolled out the next morning. The road ahead was long but light. The most important things stayed with us, and this time no one could take it. Some stories don't need a loud climax to end. They close with people returning to their proper places, and the truth being set on the table like a heavy object no one dares to twist anymore. I didn't win because I was smarter than anyone or richer than anyone. I won because I didn't leave. I stayed long enough to do what needed to be done, long enough for the truth to have time to speak. If you have ever been doubted, diminished, or called the wrong name inside your own family, know this: silence is not losing. It is only the phase before the truth gathers enough evidence to stand upright. If this story reached you, leave a dot or a few words so I know where you are and how you heard it. And if you want to keep walking with stories of everyday justice, where truth wins not by noise but by endurance, I would be grateful for your subscription. Thank you for staying until the end.